Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akil, and for today's episode, we cover team effectiveness. What is the fastest you've ever gone in a software team and still been the most effective? That's how we start off today's episode, and joining me is Daniel Terhorst-North, who's a coder, coach, as well as consultant, and has been for almost 3 decades. I'll put all of his socials in the description below, and with that being said, enjoy the episode.
Beyond coding.
I love stories. I love hearing real experiences. So one of the ways I frame the Cupid work is I ask people to think about a time when they found a code base joyful and a team a joy to work in. And it's funny because the energy changes, right? So
Yeah.
you see people just come alive. And
Happiness.
they'll be sitting there thinking, they go, I don't know if I have. And then you suddenly go, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that was amazing. God, I'd forgotten that. And people are kind of really centering on that. And then the fun thing with the Cupid properties is you unpack some of the reasons why that might have been the case.
Yeah.
So, I'm interested in hearing you said I've worked on some really high performing teams. I'd love to hear those stories.
Yeah. It sounds good.
What made them high performing, do you think? And if you were to go to another team, or no, when you go to another team, what do you do to try and replicate that?
Yeah, that's a really solid question, actually. What I think is that, so I knew the people that were in my team, right? We had worked together for a while. I knew what everyone was good at, and they knew what I was good at as well. We did things together. So there wasn't a task that Patrick's working on. No, we owned it as a team. If it was taking too long, we would pair up and fix it. So we already had worked together in the past, and we knew what each other's preferences were, as well as we had a certain level of autonomy within the organization. Choose the technology, for example. Choose however we would solve a problem. Obviously, we had some guidelines, but we were very free in technology choice, as well as how we wanted to approach it, right?
Mm-hmm.
We chose Scrum, sure, but we did it our own way, right? We had weekly releases, weekly demos as well, because we thought we needed fast feedback from the stakeholders, feedback from the clients. We did everything from the start, which basically meant, okay, we have a pipeline and everything we deploy goes to production, except production isn't live yet. But we'd have everything in place to make it so that we would release to production as fast as possible. And within that process, we wanted to get to a client, a actual user, as fast as possible. And that's when the actual learning kicked in. So we could incrementally improve. The stakeholders had continuous demos. We had them short every week, basically. And we could steer whichever way we wanted. The technology choices allowed us to leverage existing tool sets. We didn't have to build everything ourselves, and actually focus on the things that we did need to build in order to deliver that value. That's a lot of stuff that is packed in there. And I was kind of more junior in my role, I guess. So a lot of the stuff I didn't seek out consciously, I didn't make happen consciously as well. It kind of just happened. Obviously, my peers had some idea of how they wanted to do it, and me as well. And it kind of came together in this well-oiled machine that was very effective in what it was doing. The stakeholders were happy. We were transparent in what we were doing, what we were not doing. We had to say no to some things because we really believed it wasn't a good approach. And we had the autonomy and the responsibility to make those decisions. When I think of other organizations, first of all, that autonomy and responsibility always varies, right? Especially the larger organization you get into, the more guidelines, I call them guidelines, but they're more rules and regulations you find yourself in. As well as, the team dynamic change, the people you work with change, how much they focus on their own work varies as well. So the level of empathy, the level you get to know each other on a more personal level, that varies as well. And it takes time, especially as team size grows. The team I'm talking about was 4 people, and we did everything, right? I've gone into bigger teams, and all of a sudden we have other issues, way more overhead of just teamwork instead of figuring out how to be effective. So those are kind of my thoughts on that, I think. I love reflecting like that, and I haven't figured out the secret sauce. I think it has a lot to do with trust, responsibility, autonomy, mindset, as well as ownership. and kind of getting that aligned within the parties involved as well, not just within the development team, but also the stakeholders, basically the organization as well.
I could listen to this all day. I mean, and the thing is, I think you've touched on some really important points. So there's something I'm going to pick up because I'm English, and obviously English is your second language. You said a bigger team has teamwork, and I interpreted that as like there's work you have to do when you're a big team.
Yeah.
We also talk about teamwork, which is work when we work together as a team and collaborate. And
Yeah.
I love this. I love the double meaning of like, with a bigger team, there's teamwork. There's like just admin and overhead of being a big team. Yeah. So do you believe in teamwork? Yes, I do. And it's not good.
Exactly.
But there's so much of this. Before we hit record, I was saying that my definition of agile, and I'm not necessarily a huge proponent of agile. Well, I'm certainly not a proponent of big A agile.
Yeah.
I think people have got stuck in the local maximum with agile methods. But my kind of distilled definition of agile is work in small chunks, get feedback, take engineering seriously, and it feels to me like you and this team absolutely nailed that. So, giving yourself weekly releases when you're building a product in a big company, weekly is actually pretty fast, right? When you're in startup mode, or when you're building something that you can make make and release changes within hours or days or whatever, that's great. Often, certainly if you're in a regulated like a financial sector or healthcare or telco or whatever, there's a load of reasons why weekly is a reasonable cadence, and certainly people's availability. So I love that you're doing these demos every week and that you're making them quick. There's one team I was coaching a long time ago, and it was an interesting thing. It was two client folks. It was in an insurance firm, two client folks and two. I was working for a consultancy and two consultants, and I wasn't in the team. I was kind of coaching the team.
Yeah.
To deliver. And one of the things I got them doing was, as a team, they would do a showcase every week. And particularly the client folks, I wanted them doing the showcase. And you just saw the fear in their eyes, right?
Yeah. Oh no. Every week?
Yeah. And well, no, at all. So I got them through the first showcase, and it was exactly what you'd imagine. It was like really kind of speaking really quietly. Really nervous, looking down, no eye contact, shuffle, 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 looking at each other, looking down again. And what they were doing was, so it's an insurance system, and they had three big stovepipe, like mainframe systems. You had home, car, and life, right, is your main insurance buckets.
Yeah.
And someone had the idea that we should sell combined car and home insurance. We know where you live, we know you've got a car, we can do you a deal. And they said, that's a great idea. Like the home folks said, that's a great idea, build it in car. And the car folks said, that's a great idea, build it in home, right? So we all thought it was a great idea. No one wanted to take responsibility of it.
Yeah.
So anyway, this team, they started with, they said, well, let's just build like a Java, it's in Java. We'll build a facade across both of them. And it's just going to send messages to each of them.
Yeah.
But we'll present that as a single kind of integrated screen. And so you'd go in, you'd ask for a quote with a postcode, and it would go off to the car thing and get a car vehicle quote for that postcode. And home would get a home quote for that postcode. Excuse me. And so in the first week, it was all, SAP messages going backwards and forwards. I think XML going over the wire. Anyway, so they spent the first week just intercepting these wire messages. And then they were able to just template them and drop values in and, just start sending their own messages. So they could fake being the UI.
Yeah.
And this is as far as they'd got in a week, is they'd intercepted some messages and they'd written a little stub thing that would send messages to these two systems and get a response and put it on a really simple web screen, like nothing fancy at all.
Yeah.
And they were almost like embarrassed. They were going, well, this is all, what we've managed to achieve this way. And they used words like, this is all we've managed to do this week. And I was just going head in my hand. You're
that is
really
sad.
like salespeople.
Yeah.
So I said, like, all we've managed to achieve is And so anyway, so the manager who was kind of sponsoring this, he looked at this and he said, "Wait, is that car and home data on the same screen?"
Yeah.
I said, "Well, yeah." He said, "In a week?" Yeah. So that's fake data, right? You're just mocking up the screen. No, no, no. We're talking to the real systems. And he practically fell off his chair.
Yeah. Blown
So
away.
they went, "Oh, okay." So the next week they do the next demo and they've done the next thing. But now they're kind of feeling a bit more bullish and they're kind of, anyway,
Yeah.
by like week 5 or 6, it was a show.
Yeah.
And they would spend half a day of their I call it iterations, but half a day of their time box preparing for the showcase because they realized that this was their PR.
Yeah.
And what was happening was this manager started bringing his buddies along. And so now, after about 5 or 6 weeks of this, you had an audience, right, of about a dozen managers across the business, nothing to do with this project,
Yeah.
who would come along and watch this showcase. And it was just amazing, like the energy
I
of
love
these
that.
people. And it's exactly, and it wasn't just a show. Obviously, they're getting feedback, they're getting ideas. Other people from the organization are saying, well, look, if you can do that with home and vehicle, what about multi-vehicle policies? And what about what if they have more than one home? I mean, it's a much smaller segment, but
Yeah.
people who have second homes. And then so they were starting to riff on this, and the feedback loop of having real domain experts and real working code on a weekly basis was just so powerful. And teams don't do this, and it's such a shame.
Yeah. I I don't know why. That's the thing, right? It's very simple to show what you've done, show the value that you've delivered, show it to your end user or to your most important stakeholders, to people that care, right? Because we're in the same boat, same organization, hopefully same goals and priority.
Well, so yes
Yet
and
it
no.
doesn't happen.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
If you have, and this is where, and it's not my phrase, but the idea of
Mm.
what they call time sliced waterfall.
Yeah.
They have these methods that Scrum and XP and things, and they have this idea of a time box, and you have like a 2 week or 3 week sprint or iteration,
Mm.
and the literature is like you run it like a mini project, so you plan it, you execute it, and then you have something at the end. And that's not how you see it. It's just a drip feed of work going
Yeah.
in, and 2 weeks later.
Continuous.
Um, and and so the showcaseability of it, if you like, kind of just atrophies. People stop doing it,
Mm.
and you do turn into a feature factory. So you're just kind of pulling the next ticket down, going and coding it and shipping it, or putting it into UAT where it's going to languish for the next 3 months because they can't get enough test environments. But you don't care because your job isn't to move the work into production. Your job is to
Yeah.
get the ticket
UAT.
and do the next ticket. And definition of done becomes definition of blame, right? So I finish my bit. Patrick's not testing it.
That's
Not
it.
my problem, right? I'm doing
Exactly.
it. And so I was right. I was taking notes as you were telling your story because I just love your story. And you're saying that from the get go. Okay, you're in a green field, so it's much easier to get this hygiene from
Yeah.
the start. But still, most people don't. From the get go, you said when we build something, we will put it in production.
Yeah.
It's fake production, but that's it's not done until it's live, right?
Exactly.
And as soon as we get human beings who care enough about this that we can talk to, they will see it in that environment.
Yeah.
And again, this attitude you adopt, this position you take of we're not here to write code, we're here to make an impact on a product because that makes an impact on a customer. That informs a lot of what you do. So you don't want to build everything from scratch. You want to leverage
Yeah.
existing tool sets. You want to make decisions, and they might not be popular decisions, right? And so you decided to adopt another attitude, which is transparency. We're
Yeah.
going to tell our stakeholders that we're doing these things. So if they're not happy with that, we can have the conversation rather than kind of try and do it behind their back. And then when they find out, just go, well, it's too late now, sort of thing.
Exactly.
And that mindset is, I think, is so key. And I think a lot of that we've lost along the way. So yeah. So and then pre-Cupid for the last 10 years or so, I've been looking at exactly this. How do effective teams, or are there patterns, are there techniques that teams can adopt to make them more effective?
Yeah.
The software developers can adopt to make them more effective? Or is it just a fluke and you have to have that brilliant 4-person team with Patrick and his buddies in it? And, and that's a viable business model, right? As you go
Sure.
out and you find successful teams and you buy them, right?
Yeah.
You just go,
Expensive.
well, yeah, it's expensive, but it happens in
Yeah.
banks a lot. You'll get a team that builds some kind of asset management tool,
Mhm.
and the next bank goes, "Well, we need an asset management tool. Let's go
Get
and
that same team. Yeah.
buy the team." Right? How much is your team?
Exactly. The
Well, I
whole
guarantee
thing.
it's less than a commercial asset management product. So,
Yeah.
so we'll do that.
Exactly. So, I mean, we're already recording. If you don't mind, I'll use
No, I'm
whatever we
very
talked
happy.
about it so far. But you've probably asked people the same question, right? Think about that time where you were truly effective within that software engineering environment, within that team environment. And was that kind of the silver lining that resulted in Cupid?
So no. Cupid was let's see, it's life imitating satire.
Okay.
That's the best way to describe Cupid. It was so it started a few years ago at a mini conference where I did a 5-minute lightning talk.
Yeah.
It's an Ignite style talk, so you have 20 slides and they advance automatically every 15 seconds, which is a terrifying way to give a talk. And it also means that you end up doing a disproportionately huge amount of work for a 5-minute talk.
Yeah.
So 1 hour talk, I can put those together pretty quickly. 5-minute talk, I mean, literally days of my life, right? That I will never see again.
Yeah. Short but sweet.
And I was looking at Solid, which I suspect most people have come across. Solid is a set of 5 principles that was popularized by, originally documented by Robert C. Martin, and then the Solid acronym was coined by Mike Feathers. And it describes 5 principles of particularly object-oriented software development. And I'm a fan of these things, right? I think, useful tenets, useful sets of rules, Kent Beck's 4 rules of effective code, Alistair Coburn's 4 principles, all of these, there's some really good stuff out there.
Yeah.
And the beef I have and continue to have with Solid is, and actually it's the same beef I have with Scrum, is this is really good advice for 30 years ago. Right? I'm not even kidding. It's 30 years ago. And okay, there's a lot of advice from 30 years ago that is still totally relevant, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of XP, so test-driven design, which is writing a small model client ahead of writing the code, kind of keeps you honest, keeps you focused.
Yeah.
It doesn't replace design in the large, but no one ever said it does replace design in the large. It's a useful programming. I think of it as a good way to drive. It doesn't tell you where you're going. It doesn't tell you how to decide what route to take. It tells you how to be a good driver. So whatever route you decide to take, whatever your bigger picture architecture is,
Yeah.
TDD is a really, really good way of navigating parts of that. And if you look at it in the original context, which is extreme programming, the overriding part of that, which sadly has gone by the wayside, people don't really talk about, is a thing called metaphor. And the idea was that you would have a system metaphor, and the problem with system metaphor is it's really hard to describe, but basically it means you have an overarching architectural vision, an overarching domain vocabulary,
Okay.
a way of describing things that all of the team is behind. And if you ask any member of the team what we're building, they use the same words. If independent team members or pairs of teams, because pair programming came out of XP as well, another fantastic practice.
Yeah.
If you asked individual pairs how they would go about doing something, the chances are they would come up with similar answers because they're working within this metaphor.
Yeah.
So without that, no, TDD on its own is not a good way to do design in the large. That's not its purpose. But so a lot of these practices have stood the test of time. I'm 30 years into my career. I still, when I'm writing code, I will use TDD a lot of the time. I'm not obsessive about it. it's a pattern, right? So
Yeah.
it suits a particular context. When I have that context, I reach for that pattern. When I don't, I don't. Uh, um, but when you look at the principles of solid, you have 5 pieces of advice, if you like, 5 rules to live by,
Yeah.
most of which don't make any sense in the context of how we write software now.
Hmm.
How we would write software now, and I can unpack each one of them. And what happens then is various software crafts people just get cross at me.
Yeah.
They write angry blogs about how I don't understand X, and when I'm taking X as literally how it's described. And then what they want is, they want their own interpretation of X, where
Exactly.
notary Scotsman. And so my favorite is the single responsibility principle. I read a blog recently where someone was deciding that SRP really means doing domain-driven design well.
Okay.
I was like, no, it
That's an
doesn't.
interpretation. Yeah.
No, it doesn't. The fact that you want to do domain-driven design well makes me happy.
Yeah.
The fact that you want SRP to mean that makes you revisionist, right? So,
Yeah.
what single responsibility? And again, well, actually, let's pick that one because it's a really good example.
Hmm.
In the 90s, we would typically have different people, different teams working on different layers of our code base, right?
Yeah.
We had a layered architecture, 3-tier architecture was the flavor of the day. You had enterprise Java, you had enterprise C++, you had these systems where you might have a fat client on a desktop, or a rich client, sorry, on a desktop, which would be written in C Sharp. No, C Sharp didn't exist then. VB.NET, Visual Basic, or it would be in Visual C++.
All right.
Then your middle tier would be Java or C++ or something. And then your backend was a relational database. And you would, entire different teams would work on those different things. You have a big stack of requirements and they go off to the various teams, and
Yep.
you do your 6-month or 12-month or 18-month release, right? And we worked in big chunks of time with big chunks of code. And so the advice for single responsibility is to say that a class or a module should only have one reason to change.
Hmm.
It should only have one vector of change. And that makes a huge amount of sense. If I've got people in different teams touching literally the same source files,
Yeah.
that's hugely risky. And so having as a design principle that you keep the separate layers in separate parts of the code base
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense, right? And people didn't. They hacked all their stuff into these massive, massive source files. And so Bob
Exactly.
don't do that. That's silly. Right? Separate out the things that need to be separate so different people can work on them with different cadence.
Yeah.
Now roll that forward 10, 15, not even 10 years. 2 huge things happen. One is that we start co-locating teams.
Hmm.
And what that means is the person doing UI and the person doing middle and the person doing database and the person doing whatever else, they might even be the same person. They're certainly likely to be in the same team.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense now to have those code in different places. What you've done is you've introduced a bookkeeping exercise, right? Of
Exactly.
get set all the way down. And I was writing enterprise Java absolutely based on this. And you would have like a web view, which is called a JSP, and that would talk to a servlet, and that would talk to a session bean or an entity bean, and that would talk to a data access object, a DAO, which
Yeah.
would then talk to a session or entity bean, and that would talk to I can't remember even where it was. No, that's the DAO because that's the database side. There was a data transfer object, DTO. There you
Yeah.
go. DTO is data transfer object that went between your middle layer and your UI, and then DAO went from your UI from your middle layer to your database. Basically, 7 layers of this was quite common. 7 different source files, plus the XML to glue them all together because there's 7 of them, right? And you don't want to lose track. And then what you end up with is this enormous double entry bookkeeping exercise.
Yeah.
And again, right, this was what some people at the time, and I was one of them, right? This isn't like, oh, they're all stupid. This was what we did.
Yeah.
If you're in that context, please don't put all that code in the same place. It's going to get horribly messy.
Yeah.
Whereas if you think of business reasons for change, typically maybe I've got a new piece of data that I want to put on my screen. That's a database change, a data access change, a business rules change, a view change, a view interaction logic change, right? All of
Yeah.
those things are based on that. Hey, Patrick, we've now got customer's date of birth and we want to display that, right? Very simple sounding requirement. Patrick's like,
Exactly.
oh dear, I'm going to spend the next 7 days bookkeeping.
Hacking away at those layers. Yeah.
Right. It makes a lot more sense for all that to be in one place. And then all of the date of birth stuff lives in dateofbirth.java,
Yeah.
whatever it is, or dateofbirth.go. And all the things that you need there are there, and that's where you do the work. And so again, single responsibility of its time made a lot of sense. We don't write code like that anymore.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it wrong, it makes it redundant. And in fact, what it does is it makes it bad advice now.
Interesting.
Now what you're getting is all of the admin and none of the upside.
Exactly.
You don't have 7 different teams working on these things.
Yeah.
And you can apply the same to open close. Here you go. I'll give you another one. Right, open close principle. Well, there's a hilarious side story here, which is that Bob Martin's understanding of open close principle is different from Bertrand Meyer, who coined it.
Yeah.
And what it says is that it's about giving advice to people who are going to inherit source code. So
Okay.
Patrick's going to pick up some of Daniel's C++, and I want you to know which parts of that code you should be changing and which parts of that code you should not be changing.
Yeah.
Right? What did I design for you to extend, and what shouldn't you? And so really it's about information hiding. So it says code should be open for extension. In other words, Patrick wants to make my thing do something new and clever because he's awesome and he's got a good idea. So it should allow that. It should be closed for modification. He shouldn't be able to go into its internals and tinker with them.
Yeah.
And again, all of that makes sense because, again, you think of all these different teams and people and various actors involved in
And the side effects that it might cause.
Construction in the 90s was a big bunch of people. And then a single change happened in our industry in the 90s, which is refactoring. And refactoring, Martin Fowler's wonderful, wonderful seminal book, it's about making deterministic changes to the structure of code, particularly OO code. But there's, the idea has been transferred into databases in terms of deterministic database refactorings.
Yeah.
Into functional programming. So there are kind of refactorings for functional programming, like introducing a parameter or introducing a closure or whatever it might be. And what refactoring said is we don't need to think of code as a fixed thing anymore.
Exactly.
And to show you how baked in that was, the by far the most prevalent source control system in the mid to late 90s was a thing called CVS.
Yeah.
And CVS is the forerunner to Subversion. So CVS is file-based version control.
Okay.
And what would happen is, which means then changing or making a code commit was order n, where n is the number of files you have. If you have 30 files and they've all changed, there's 30 different things happen. They all get rewritten with their own individual changes.
Yeah.
And which again, if typically you'd only be working on a small number of files, so CVS commits were fairly small, but they certainly weren't atomic. And they could break halfway through. But the interesting thing to observe is that if you rename a file, CVS loses all history.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's a big thing.
Well, no, it's not if you never rename files.
Yeah. But
it
then
is
you never can.
when you start renaming files a lot, right?
Exactly.
Now, let's take CVS loses history when you rename a file. With refactoring, with Java names files by class name.
Yeah.
Those 3 bits of information mean this: anyone who was refactoring Java code using CVS had a really hard time tracking history.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not doable.
Because you lose it all the time. And that was one of the reasons Subversion appeared. So the same folks who wrote CVS wrote Subversion to be atomic-based commit. So it's order 1 now. You can have thousands of files and it's still order 1.
Yeah.
It tracked renames, it tracked deletions. So all of these now were tracked operations. We don't even think about that now.
No, I never knew that actually.
Yeah, how about that? So what refactoring gave us was the idea that code, you don't write code and then park it and write the next bit and park it. Code is now malleable.
Hmm.
And Ward Cunningham uses this lovely metaphor of code as clay.
Yeah.
And you're not writing your solution like building layers of a brick wall.
Yeah.
You're molding this thing out of clay, and you keep going back and reshaping pieces. And as you understand more about it, you then go and shape it again.
Yeah.
And and so now the idea of open and closed makes no sense. All code is open and all code is closed, right?
Yeah. I like that metaphor.
Yeah, if I need to change, Will Cunningham is wonderful for metaphors. He also came up with the idea of gardening, and you're maintaining a garden,
Exactly.
and it's okay to let it get a bit messy. People are like really obsessive about refactoring, really obsessive about
Clean.
dry and this.
Yeah.
And it's just let the garden tell you the shape it wants to be, and then go and help it.
Yeah.
Do the weeding, right? But look at the paths that people make when they go across the garden, and then create affordances to make it easy for people to use those paths. Don't tell them where to go.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Let the garden serve the people. Anyway, I'm a huge Will Cunningham fan, as you can tell. And yeah, so open and closed again, and another part as well, which I don't know if you may well not have come across. In the 80s and particularly in the 90s, we thought, the industry thought that source code would be a product. So in other words, you might buy a healthcare code library.
Okay.
It's got all of the core constructs. Someone's done the hard work of domain modeling, entity relationship modeling of how hospitals work and patient records and
Out of the box.
whatever else.
Yeah.
And you get all of that, and you just adapt it to your local hospital or your local healthcare app.
Yeah.
And it turned out, as you were saying before we hit record, an awful lot of the technology utility we get now is through SaaS, is software as a service.
Yeah.
And so what took off, it turned out, was APIs rather than source code.
Yeah.
So I can get access to a very, very rich domain model of sales, but I don't get the code. I use Salesforce.
Exactly.
Or I want the rich domain of source code management to get a bit meta. I use GitHub.
Yeah.
I don't get a source code system. And so that model sort of died. And so the idea that you would even need to tell people which bits of code were okay to change becomes vestigial, becomes redundant.
Interesting.
Right? And we're still saying, there are 5, I'm going to give you the 5 most important things you need to know about writing good software are, well, the first 2 have been redundant for 30 years. What else have you got? Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
This is not advice I'd give to anyone.
Yeah. What I like about that, I really like
as my response to, well, what advice would you give them then?
Exactly. I mean, I like that you say, right, it was right for the time then, but the world has evolved, right? And either your principles will, or they will stand the test of time. Stuff like pair programming, we still do, right? We still see the same benefits. As soon as that becomes obsolete, you're not going to advise that anymore, right? But as the world shifts, so do new patterns, and they pop out of the ground, and they might be applicable in certain contexts, right? I don't think the world is black or white, nor do I think you do, because it depends on the context what is right or wrong.
Right, and context shifts slowly.
Exactly.
The lovely Neil Stevenson, the idea that William Gibson, the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed, right? So, refactoring starts in the mid-90s. It takes a long time for it to become mainstream.
Exactly.
One of the big seismic shifts that happened is when you started seeing refactoring, automated AST refactoring being built into IDEs.
Yeah.
So JetBrains, IntelliJ was a very early adopter of this idea of having a refactoring browser. Of course, this had already existed for decades in Smalltalk.
Okay.
So Smalltalk, as one of the first object-oriented languages, comes with a browser. It's called a browser, which is its IDE.
Yeah.
The Smalltalk browser has refactorings baked into it, but because Smalltalk is a niche language and the browser, the IDE, is an intrinsic part of the Smalltalk world, it took a long time for it to break out of that world.
Interesting.
And now I'm going to probably make some stuff up here, but there was a thing called Visual Age for Smalltalk, which was an IBM tool. And that led to Visual Age for Java. And I believe Visual Age for Java was the first attempt at a refactoring IDE for Java.
Okay.
Smalltalk folks saying, well, look, clearly the world's using Java rather than Smalltalk, which is disappointing.
Yeah.
Let's at least try and help them.
Yeah.
And then so when refactoring became not only widely, I guess got mind share, but became an automated thing. So the point of Martin's original refactoring book is it's a catalog of patterns, and it tells you how to do it. Right? It says to extract a parameter from a method signature.
Yeah.
These are the steps you go through.
Exactly.
No one does that anymore.
Yeah.
Right? In any kind of statically typed OO language, your IDE does this for you.
Exactly. It's a solved problem.
Rename parameter, and rename parameter is hard, right? Rename parameter is identify everywhere that I'm using the word customer,
Yeah.
but only in the context of this variable.
Exactly.
Everywhere else I'm using customer, don't touch it.
Exactly.
And it turns out that's quite hard. But
Yeah.
if you've got an AST, it's really easy. Abstract syntax tree. Sorry for folks who don't know what an AST is.
Yeah.
So the idea is that your code in your editor, you can represent as an abstract syntax tree, as a directed graph that represents all of the code, and so then you can project that and onto a screen as code. And refactorings then are deterministic shifts around or transformations on that AST.
That makes
And
sense.
as soon as you have that, then you have a very deterministic model for doing refactorings, and suddenly they become as trivial as typing.
Yeah.
Which is awesome, but really, there's a lot going on under the hood when you do that.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that made a lot of the existing wisdom guidance around code management, if you like, which was like, don't touch it, you'll only break it.
Yeah.
Because
I get how
we're
that would work.
humans and we make mistakes. And then they say, well, look, if I can do this in a completely automated, deterministic way,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that's probably safer. Yeah, we could probably do that.
Yeah. It's a solved
But the
problem.
advice remains, but it's now redundant.
Yeah. Interesting. So we're in 2022 now, right? As you say, we have tools like our IDEs that help us be more effective, help us deliver value faster by means of just having solved problems out of the box, right? We don't need to think about renaming or abstracting a variable or refactoring, stuff like that. We can do that on the fly whenever you want it, wherever you want it, and we have version history to help us as well. Yet we have other problems, right? Some organizations deliver value faster than others, and they haven't quite figured out how to do that, or they think they do. They think Spotify model, Scrum, Agile, everything, adopt it all throughout, and no one becomes happier because of it. There's something there that organizations are figuring out, but not everyone has. And I'm wondering what your take is on that. What makes teams or organizations effective nowadays versus, I think, in the past?
So the frustrating thing here is, the solution, the demonstrable solution to this has been available to us for decades.
Yeah.
And it goes back to a chap called Eliyahu Goldratt, who's a physicist. And he got into management, which is an unusual career choice for a physicist. But what happened was he was looking at organizations and saying, the point of physics is you look at the amazing complexity and emergence and wonder of nature.
Yeah.
And from subatomic activity to births and deaths of universes and things. And you think to yourself, I wonder if there are simple rules underlying this.
Yeah.
That we could discover, that we could empirically discover, and then we could evolve, iteratively refine, that would explain all of this craziness we see around us. And that is the history of science. So for the longest time, we thought, well, for several centuries, we thought that Newton's description of how time and space work was the answer. It was a very good approximation.
Yeah.
And there are a few strange things, like Mercury does something a bit weird as it goes around the sun, and we couldn't really explain that. And we didn't really have a good story around gravity and so on. And then Einstein comes along in the early 1900s, and he says, well, look, actually, it's a bit more complicated than that. Time and space are the same thing, and let me explain what happens when you imagine you're sitting on a beam of light. traveling at light speed.
Yeah.
And so what we discovered is that Newtonian physics is a good approximation unless you are very, very small, very, very big, or traveling very, very fast, right? In
Yeah.
those three cases, it kind of breaks down, but the rest of the time, it's really good, which is why we didn't notice it wasn't correct, right? It's only when you start flinging things into space that,
Yeah.
or
It doesn't make sense.
other atoms, that it starts to, some of the mass starts to break down. And so he said, well, what if the same thing applies to businesses?
Hmm.
What if there's a really simple set of rules that underlie how businesses work, and if we could just figure out what they are, it would all make sense. And it's a brilliant take, right? Because we're all busy trying to get more and more elaborate management theories. And he said,
Yeah.
what if we're looking at the wrong thing? We've been trying to understand how people work and have what are called time and motion studies and productivity studies. And
Yeah.
we still, in the 2022, I still know organizations that have tools installed in people's laptops that measure your keystrokes and
Insane,
how
right?
and
Yeah.
which windows are in focus to get some kind of. And he said, what if you just look it in the wrong place? And it's not about the workers, it's about the work items moving through the system.
Yeah.
And he says, and what if that's a universal characteristic? So what if those work items could be cars going through a factory, or they could be, digital work items that don't even exist in the real world.
Yeah.
Like features or bugs or something. What if they all had the same basic premise, which is you start at some point, you've made a commitment to do some stuff, work happens, and then you deliver something you deliver on that commitment, and someone says thank you.
Yeah.
And if we just say that, we're gonna track one piece of work all the way through that. Instead of seeing all the people and how busy the people are, we're going to forget about the people for a minute and the machines. We're going to look at the work item, and we're going to look at where it gets stuck. Just
Dog's
off
gone.
camera, two small dogs.
Yeah.
We're insisting on being let out of the room. So we're going to follow the work item. We're going to see where people work on it,
Yeah.
where it gets stuck, waiting on someone who isn't there, where it gets stuck in a queue where there's, the whoever's at the head of the queue is beavering away. They're working away as hard as they can,
Yeah.
but you're item 30 in the queue, and then you're 29, 28, 27. So you've got to wait for all the items ahead of you. We're going to see where the person who was working on you got halfway through working on you and then context switched to something else. So we want to understand what. So imagine that you give each work item a little diary.
Yeah.
So I want you to keep a little activity diary of everything that happens to you, including every time you get stuck. And you map the entire, what they call the value stream, the process of from commitment to thank you.
Yeah.
And he said, now if we do this at scale, if we do this for all of the work items going through the system, it's like, instrumenting all the cars flowing along a highway.
Yeah.
Is you're going to see where the bottlenecks are. You're going to see where the cars get stuck. And he calls this theory of constraints. He says, so theory of constraints says this. It says, for any system, for any value chain, there is a part of that system that is the current constraint. It's the pinch point.
Okay.
It's the bit where everything's, where that constraint is constraining the entire efficacy, the entire effectiveness of the system.
Yeah.
If I could make that pipe wider, if I could make work there happen faster, or each work item take less work at that point, everything's going to flow faster. So that's his first observation. There is a bottleneck, right? Mm-hmm. And so then the obviously the step zero is find it, right?
Exactly. Figure it out.
He says two really valuable things. The first thing is this: there's no point optimizing the system anywhere apart from the bottleneck.
Okay.
If I optimize upstream, just stuff ends up in the queue faster.
Yeah.
Right. If I optimize downstream, it doesn't matter because nothing's getting there.
Exactly.
So just focus on the bottleneck. And then he has this lovely, simple process, like 5-step process for how to address that bottleneck, widen the pipe, as it were.
Yeah.
And then what happens is you have a next bottleneck.
Exactly.
And the great thing about this is, slash terrifying, is you don't know where that next bottleneck is going to be until you've unblocked this one.
Yeah, it's just gonna pop up.
It's just going to pop up. And my favorite metaphor for this is, imagine you're driving along over hills.
Yeah.
You can see the current hill, but nothing else. Once you get over that hill, you can then see the next hill,
Exactly.
right? But you can only ever see one hill ahead, right?
Yeah.
Or the hill you're currently going up. And that's fine, because that's all you need to be able to drive.
Yeah.
But so then we can apply theory of constraints to knowledge work. But there's multiple layers to this. There's the shipping stuff.
Yeah.
How come Patrick's team is so much better at shipping stuff than the other teams? Well, if you instrument that process and you see where the work is, there'll be fewer delays, and the delays will be shorter, and there's less. So one of the big levers that we have that we tend not to pull is work in process, the amount of actual things we've got in flight.
Yeah.
Because two things happen when you get a lot of things in flight. The first thing that happens is queues. So things back up behind other things, and so they take longer. And the second is context switching. If I've got 5 things, I'm going to be jumping between the 5 things.
Back and forth.
There's a switching cost each time, right? I've got to get my head in the game and all of that, and I get distracted.
Yeah.
So if you limit the work in process, then things fly through much faster. There's that, but there's also, we're looking at that at a feature level or a bug fix level or whatever. If you pan back and look at what the customer's trying to achieve, what it is they want to get done, it may be that the thing we're doing right now isn't even the most useful thing.
Okay.
So we could be doing the wrong thing better and better.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to also look at whether it's the right thing. And this comes right back to your comment right at the beginning, that one of the things that you obsessed about with your team of 4 people was getting feedback. Are we even building the right thing? Because it's so easy, especially if you're good at building things, and especially if the thing you're building is cool, to not stop and ask yourself if it's the right thing.
Exactly. You'll just keep going. Keep going until at some point you deliver something and people are like, this is not what we expected.
So here's where it gets all managementy. Is because I can tell this story and you're nodding along, and when I tell this story to other people, they nod along, and when I give them copies of The Goal to read, and The Goal came out as a graphic novel a couple of years ago, so you don't even need to be able to read very well.
Okay.
To read The Goal. It's utterly brilliant. It doesn't land. And the reason it doesn't land is this, is if I say, look, Patrick, you've got these 200 people working for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you that the best way to get work to move through the system quickly is for most of them not to be working 100% of the time.
Yeah. You're going to be like, what? That doesn't sound effective or efficient at all.
Right. What am I paying them for? I'm paying them to sit around. Is that what I'm doing? I'm paying them to sit around. And that's exactly the pushback you get. And of course, people aren't lazy and people aren't stupid.
Yeah.
And when they have slack in the system, what are they doing? They're going and improving the system.
Yeah.
Patrick is seeing that there's a great way to speed up the build, or we can instrument this thing in a different way, or the work coming down the pipe. We were doing a load of stuff in Go. We're moving a load of the server-side stuff to Rust now, and I could be really useful to the team by learning Rust.
Yeah.
That would be a really good use of some time. So the slack time we use for what's called Kaizen work, which is improvement work. So we do work that makes work better, or work that makes work easier. So there's some percentage of the team and some percentage of your capacity is moving the work through the system.
Yeah.
The rest of it is improving the system.
Okay.
And this is where you get through to sustainability and all of those kind of things. Is that how do we make it so we can consistently do better work? And landing that message is hard.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
You're doing some kind of smoke and mirrors thing, and you're really not. But yeah, and it's frustrating because, or rather, it tends to manifest itself as the team grows.
Okay.
Because 3 or 4 people are going to see queues straight away.
Yeah.
3 or 4 people, there's a very short pipe for the work to go through.
Yeah.
If work is going in here and not appearing here for a while, you're going to notice that. If you have 20 or 30 people involved in that value stream, it's much easier to lose track of where the work is,
Yeah.
especially if you're not even looking at the work items, you're looking at the workers, you're tracking people's busyness.
Interesting, actually.
And you can keep people really busy and have no work flowing. Right?
Yeah. That's I
and that's where you see the difference between effective and less effective teams, is
yeah,
what they're measuring and what they're obsessing about.
I get that. That's also so I had a conversation with a potential client and they were like, "Well, I want to make our development teams more effective because the deadline has moved up. I don't know why though. He thinks it's architecture or it's teamwork. Something's wrong, but he can't exactly put his finger on what the problem is, right? But he does notice that the work stream at the far end of the work, there's not as much output there. So somewhere, somehow, it goes wrong. He just doesn't know where, right? And there's a lot of hops. There's a lot of work involved there into making it more effective, making sure the deadlines are met on time, making sure the goals are met and the right things are delivered there. It's just, it's hard to see that from an outside point of view. Whereas if I think back to myself as a developer, I can figure out whether the development experience is good or it's bad, right? If it's easy to do stuff, if I have responsibility, if pull requests get stuck too long, if people don't exactly know what they need to build, if requirements keep changing, deadlines are very tight for the things we need to deliver, all that stuff is very visible within a team. Yet from outside, can't really figure it out somehow.
Right. so I have, again, it's a very straightforward process that people simply don't seem to do. It's called value stream mapping. So that thing I told you where each work item has a little diary, right?
Yeah.
So you can map that, and in the before times when we'd all be in a room together with a wall,
Yeah.
I would use post-its for this, different color post-its. Nowadays I do something like Miro. What you're doing is getting everyone involved in the work to map their part of the process.
Yeah.
So I did this with provisioning a server. So literally from we need a server to ordering the parts, getting them delivered, building the server, racking it, cabling it in, putting an operating system on it. All of the bits that involved.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, the people involved in that haven't really got together before.
Hadn't talked to each other before about
Yeah,
this.
they
Yeah.
certainly hadn't all seen the process laid out on a wall before.
Yeah.
I did it with in a bank with a path to live, right? Literally. So we finished the feature. Now we just got to get it into production.
Yeah.
And it was a long, long office. Couple hundred people on the floor, and we went all the way along the long wall, all the way along the back wall, and halfway along back
Yeah. That's insane.
in post-its of all the things that needed to happen. And it was worse than that because there were loops in there and there were failure cases.
Of
And
course.
we all looked at this and we just went, this is insane.
Yeah.
This is just nuts. And yes, we need to fix this. But what it was. And so that piece there, often just by visualizing it, you get insights.
Yeah. It's the starting point.
And there's a sequence. So the phrase I use a lot, I say, you're in a room full of tigers. I'm going to switch the lights on. Right? Now you can see the tigers. Okay.
Yeah.
You were already in a room full of tigers. Don't blame me for the tigers.
Exactly. They were already there. Yeah.
Thank me instead that you can see them. So this is what we did. And so visualize. And just from that, often teams can say, look, that entire piece there is redundant. Why do we still do that? We stop, that was to solve a problem that hasn't been a problem for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And so then I describe a sequence I call VESA, which is an acronym. VESA: visualize, eliminate, simplify, standardize, and automate. So I'll say that again. So visualize is your value stream map.
Yeah.
I'm a massive fan of a process called event storming. So if you Google event storming or DuckDuckGo event storming,
Yeah.
it's a lovely, lovely lightweight modeling process for doing exactly this. Using post-its on a wall to model a
Exactly.
value stream. Eliminate. Right. What of that process is vestigial? What of that process is redundant? Do we just do it because we do it? Then simplify. Of what's left, what can we combine? What can we do in parallel? What can we
Make it easier.
make easier.
Yeah.
What can we just borrow from elsewhere in the organization? Now we've eliminated what we can, we've simplified what's left. Now
Yeah.
we standardize. Can we make this the same every time? And once it's standard, we can automate it.
Exactly.
And my steer with Vesa is it doesn't matter how far along this path you get, you did good, right?
Yeah.
If you only get as far as visualize and eliminate, brilliant. You
Yeah.
simplify it and then simplify the process, standardize the process, automate the process. As far along that chain as you get, you still did good, right?
Exactly.
And just to do that, and again, there's no magic here. There's no sort of secret. It's a lot of it is getting the buy-in, getting
Yeah.
the management buy-in, the mind share to try this. A lot
Yeah.
of it is certainly political and posturing. So, Patrick has built his empire of thousands of people over, many years, and he's this really important guy now.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, well, perhaps if we simplified this, you could have a lot fewer people, and he gets nervous, right?
Yeah.
One of my first independent consulting clients was a big American bank, and I worked with this absolutely lovely person, and he was a senior exec in the bank, and pretty much the first conversation I had with him, he said, I've got 3,000 people in my organization. And usually when someone says that, their next sentence is, next year it'll be 5,000 people.
Exactly.
He didn't. He said, I've got 3,000 people in my organization. He said, I'm embarrassed about that.
Okay. It's too
Sorry?
much.
He said, I'm embarrassed about that. He said, it's not a 3,000 person problem. It's probably a 300 person problem. Right? We've made it a
Okay.
3,000 person problem.
Yeah.
I want to make it a 300 person problem.
I like that. Yeah.
And that's not laying off 2,500 people. It's a big
That's not
bang,
the point.
a lot of stuff for them to do, right?
Yeah.
It's this part of what we're doing we could make much simpler. And I just thought, I want to work with you.
Yeah. Exactly. I've never heard that.
And we did this. We didn't get to 300 people, but over a couple of years, we massively simplified the operation. We hugely shortened value. Well, actually, there was it took a while to get there, but at one point I had him standing on a chair in front of like 400 engineers.
Yeah.
He said, right, we're going to half lead time, double throughput,
Yeah.
with zero impact on quality by the end of the year. Go.
Yeah.
That's your bonus. Your bonus depends on halving lead time, doubling throughput. No, you're not allowed to do it by cutting corners. No loss of quality.
Exactly.
And of course, what happens? 400 engineers go off scratching their heads going, what the heck is lead time?
Yeah.
And he said to me, he said, I don't care what the results are.
Yeah.
He said, some of these teams own their entire value stream. They're going to be able to trivially halve it, right?
Yeah.
Some of these teams, everything is out of their control. Their job is coordination. They have no control over their lead time.
It's going to be impossible. Yeah.
What I care about is that I've now got 400 people obsessing about lead time, right? And it worked, right? And literally that year, that team delivered double what they had the previous year. Same people, same tech, same. There wasn't some magic pixie dust, magic wand or anything.
Yeah.
Still just as hard, still just as regulated, still just as bank, and they were able to deliver double what they had the previous year just by focusing on different things.
Interesting.
And the cool thing is this: the following year, because they were getting the hang of it by now, they doubled it again.
Yeah.
So now within 2 years, they're producing 4 times as much business change for the same money as they were 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Because they were thinking about their work a different way.
Yeah. Do you think it's because that kind of awareness and ability to experiment in that way as well? Because they don't know if it's going to work, right? They are willing to experiment, willing to give that ownership or to let the people think about their own value stream and their kind of piece of the puzzle, basically.
That's a really good question. I think an experimental mindset emerged.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting byproduct. The main thing that happened was that people weren't trying to keep themselves busy.
Yeah.
So the way you got a bonus was you demonstrated how much stuff you'd done.
Productivity.
Yeah. Because, and again, don't forget, these are big, slow-moving banking systems.
Sure.
And so any kind of realization of value is distant in space and time from when the work happens.
Yeah.
So I can't talk about value as a lever. I can't talk about improving value or increasing value. I can talk about reducing cost.
Yeah.
I talk about being more efficient, more working longer hours or whatever. So there's a big kind of macho long hours culture as well, and we kind of started to squash that. People started going home at sensible times and having home lives. I mean, it's important, right? Because then
Yeah.
people don't burn out and die. Um, and yeah, and but you saw this shift. Certainly, I think the fact that it was all unfamiliar.
Yeah.
No one knew what lead time or WIP or cumulative flow diagrams or any of this stuff was. That there was a sense of, look, no one's expecting us to get this right.
Mm.
We've got, we've got permission to kind of try some stuff, and it won't all work.
Exactly.
That
Like a wild
I
card.
think that was intrinsic in the approach we took.
Yeah.
But essentially, yeah, this chapter said, right, half lead time, double throughput. We are here to help you. You know your product best. You know your code base best. You know your path to live best. You know your regulatory environment, your compliance or
Yeah.
infosec environment best. So we're not going to tell you to halve it by doing X. We're going to tell you
Yeah.
to do what you think and pull us in where you need us. And
That's
I got
incredible.
awesome conversations with some people
I can imagine.
who are clearly brilliant, and a lot of them had felt hamstrung by Scrum.
Okay.
They'd adopted Scrum wholesale. They had a famous Scrum trainer come in to tell them that Scrum's the way. And these people with like 20, 30 years, very, very experienced engineers who were paralyzed because they didn't know they didn't know whether what they were doing was allowed. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It was this very kind of prescriptive environment.
Okay.
And just giving people permission to try and do their job. I mean, it sounds incredible, but this is what we were doing.
Yeah.
Um,
So strange.
and yeah, so over the last year or so, what I'm doing now is trying to codify. Ironically, for someone who's anti big methodologies,
Yeah.
I'm trying to codify what I've been doing as a method, but it's more like a framework in which,
Okay.
so it's not do these things. It's a let's start by you describing where you want to get to.
Yeah.
Let's describe your dream target organization.
Exactly.
What does it look like?
Yeah.
What are people doing it? What are people doing it that they're not doing now?
Yeah.
What are people able to do in it that they can't do now? What attitudes? How do people kind of position themselves in this new world that they don't do now?
Yeah.
And we come up with a really nice articulation of that future state. And then we say, okay, well, let's think about how we could move towards that. So that's clearly not where we are now.
Yeah.
And now, guess what? Theory of constraints, 30, 40-year-old gold rat stuff.
Yeah.
Of all the things that we're not doing right now, of all the attitudes we don't have right now, which of those do you think are causing us the most harm?
Exactly.
Let's start there, right?
Yeah.
And then you iterate your way towards, and what's going to happen, of course, is as you do this, your definition of your target state is going to change.
Yeah.
You discover that you could do some things you didn't know you could do, or your environment changes, or there's a global pandemic, or something happens, right?
Yeah.
That no one saw coming. And that means that your target state now changes, and that's fine.
Exactly.
So we change it, and now
That's
we
realistic.
different attitudes and different behaviors and different characteristics, but we measure it. So it's evidence-based, and we say, right, are we moving in the right direction? And that's that's the kind of framing, and then into that, there's loads of kind of techniques and tools and structures and tricks and things that we can try.
Yeah.
A big bag of those, and these are things that we've kind of developing over the last decade or so, or adopting, I guess, rather than developing, like other people's tricks.
I get that.
Then
I don't mean to cut you off, but
no, sure.
I am running out of time on this end. I would love to do a part 2 if you're up for it, because I think we
totally up
spent
for it. Yeah, I think it'd be great
a lot of time on the
deep
pre-show.
dive on this because then what it is, it's about let's put the pieces into this and figure out for your context. This we're back to context again, right?
Exactly.
Well, it's not do this thing because it works in any context, because nothing does. It's do this thing to understand your context and figure out what we want to adopt because of that.
Yeah.
and it's still really embryonic. The frameworky bit is still forming in my head and forming on paper. The bits that go in the soup, if you like, the ingredients for the soup, they're all pretty robust. I've got them.
Yeah,
I'm still
yeah.
trying to figure out what the outer piece looks like. But yes, I would
I
love to. I would love to do a part two.
I could keep going on for hours, trust me. But I am running out of time.
Running off.
So let's yeah, no, I actually got that one. We're gonna round it off here actually. I love this conversation, starting from team effectiveness and in how organizations can kind of figure out their own way. And I think we're gonna continue fully in part two. I'm gonna put Dan North's links in the descriptions. Everything you'll find on him will be in there. And with that being said, thanks for listening. See you in part two.